happy Tuesday. Good morning, PSW staff, clients, friends joining us. Yesterday we looked at Once Upon a Time in America. Have some fun with that, but no Godfather, because there's a little bit of two similarities, like I said. Also, I won't be in Friday. I'm going to be out of town just for the weekend. Something my brother's, it's personal. Personal always gets you out of any excuse. You can just say it's personal and nobody will say anything. So having said that, results should be in by today, and then we're going to see your results for Thursday. So we'll still be doing it just a day earlier, and maybe I'll play another class on Friday just as a repeat, so something fun for you guys to pay attention to. So sorry I didn't bring that up yesterday. I was going through the schedule of classes this month, and so I realized won't be in Friday. So Thursday we will see your film scoring results for Once Upon a Time in America. Okay, any other red tape we need to get out of the way? Think not. We're going to review a composer, revisit something, because tomorrow we're going to do an extra advanced class, just about more of our philosophical talks about music. We did melody, the evolution of melody, and we're going to look at the evolution of chord progressions. But before we go to that, we're going to revisit a very important Baroque composer. Bach is one of the most important, but this guy Vivaldi we talked about. And if you're like, yeah, that name sounds familiar, when you look at this class, you're going to know a lot of his music. And so we're going to talk about his life. We're going to revisit a class from about a year ago, and then we're going to talk about how that and what that has to do with our class for tomorrow. So without further ado, let's look at Antonio Vivaldi. So you've heard that piece, right? It's so famous. It's on the radio. It was recently in The Undoing. It's just used all the time. And we're going to talk about why it's used all the time. We're going to talk about his life, of course, go through it, and just talk about why would music hundreds of years ago still be relevant, and why do we still like it? So we'll get philosophical, a little bit. We'll get, we're just mostly here to have fun, right? And to learn. So let's get right into Vivaldi. There's a joke that my dad used to say, and then I read it somewhere else. So Vivaldi wrote about 500 to 800 pieces of music, including 40 to 50 operas, a bunch of stuff. But one of the jokes is that, did he write 500 pieces one time, or did he write one piece 500 times? So think about that. And as you're hearing, as we're hearing all of his music, what is that? Is that joke true? So we're going to come back to that, and because a lot of his music sounds the same a little bit, but it's different. So that's just something that I thought I'd. So let's take a look at the timeline. I put Mozart and Beethoven up there because they're people that, of course, we know a lot about. But this is before. This is in the Baroque period. Baroque, for the most part, is a French word, and it means irregularly shaped. Irregularly shaped. I guess that's, so if you think of architecture, right, like the Versailles, where Marie Antoinette, lived, that's Baroque architecture. Vivaldi and Bach are Baroque music, so it's mostly something that is after the Renaissance period, before the classical period, and it's characterized by ornate detail. So that ornate detail can be in buildings, like in Versailles, or the ornate detail can be in music. Just like as we're hearing Vivaldi, there's ornate orchestration and harmony and rhythm mostly. So rhythm is just static, but if you make it ornate rhythm, it's moving, kind of like that. So just so that's what we're talking about. So he's quite a bit earlier than, and we haven't done a class on Bach, but I know everyone kind of knows mostly what Bach, what he did. He's kind of the father of Baroque, but Vivaldi was just as much up there, and Bach actually transcribed a lot of Vivaldi's music and really considered him a great genius. So he's Italian, obviously, virtuoso violin player, teacher, composer. He was a priest. He was ordained, but he didn't go into it. He was pretty sick. He had asthma as a kid, and he was born when there was a huge earthquake that happened in Italy. So I don't know. Maybe that's is that important with the zodiac? I don't know the zodiac. I don't know those things, but it'd be kind of cool and scary to be born on the day of a huge earthquake there. He was the oldest of 5 brothers, and his father played violin, and he had musical training from his father, and they would travel Europe and Italy mostly, and they would play. Mostly his job was, for the greater part of his life, I mean, lack of a better word, day job, was teaching music at an orphanage. That's what he did. And he performed the music. He taught the kids that were abandoned, the boys up until they were 15, where they could go on and learn a different trade. He taught them music, and the girls that would stay, he taught them to music so they could perform in the orchestra and the choir at church. So he was a very giving person. And while he was the head music director at this orphanage, he was writing for songs, music, operas, concertos. He was amazingly talented on the violin. And of course, the most famous music that we know of Vivaldi is the Four Seasons. He writes the Four Seasons around 1718, and he's in this lush landscape. And this is one of the early pieces where, and Vivaldi's one of the first to use music to depict the world going around him, the world in detail, in nature. He was kind of in nature, the insects, the bugs, the water. And as we listen to this piece, you can hear that there's, and this is probably why directors and dancers and people of the arts like his music, because it's very dramatic. It changes a lot. There's a lot of tension and release that's exciting. This music's really exciting. It's got a pulse to it, and it's got a rhythm and almost a beat. You could almost put drums to it. So he wrote so much, and wrote for the church, wrote for the orphanage, had his music performed all the time. Perhaps that's why the music sounds theatrical in some sense, because if we look at a church, it's sacred, but it's also a piece of theater. If we think of the church, if we go to a service and there's music performed, and sometimes there's even acting performed, this is all in the name of the Catholic Church. But it's still almost like a show in a sense. And Bach also worked at a church. So they're writing theater music, but it's religious theater music. But it's great music nonetheless. And so he's very prolific. Writing so much music. And but his music kind of was not up to the times. It kind of went out of style a little bit, and he had to start selling off a lot of his music and became pretty poor. And he died when he was 63. So that's in 1741. So he's dead before Mozart's even born. He had an internal infection in this house. And, but, that's not that long. That's a pretty long life back then. So, but sad nonetheless. And it wasn't until the mid-20s that a music historian started looking at some of his music, and he introduced the music to a larger part of the world that it had been suppressed or just forgotten about. Vivaldi's pieces were just kind of buried, and it's hard to think. So, but sometimes you think when you create something that's ahead of its time or that's genius or whatever, it may take a few hundred years for people to realize that. Sometimes it's luck, and then you think about, well, how many pieces do we not know that that would be just amazing to hear that we're hundreds of years later. So it gets on that track, and this is stuff that I think about at night, and it keeps me up all the time. But I mean, if we listen to a piece like the Four Seasons, what I loved is my mom would play this in the car. And if you remember my complaining childhood of going to the Southgate Elementary School and feeling like I was going to get beat up every day, and I never did, by the way. She would play a lot of classical music. That was the thing. Classical music on the way there. On the way back, I could play Nirvana and Weezer. But on the way there, the Four Seasons was a very important piece in my life. I loved winter so much because it was the first time I heard dynamics, and dynamics is something when it's loud or when it's soft. It was probably the first time I used my ears to determine, music doesn't always have to be on a constant flow. It can also be dramatic. It can also be loud and soft. That's part of Vivaldi's theatrical and dramatic use of how exciting, and that's what makes his music so exciting. I mean, as we're listening, it just sounds so fresh still, hundreds of years later, because he had the rhythm and the building and the tension and the release. And what he's mostly doing is chord progressions with melodies over it. That's what we do today, right? That's what pop music, Burt Bacharach, that's what they do. They have chord progressions and there's a melody on top. Vivaldi's doing that with this persistent rhythm, constant rhythm going on. And that's why I think this music still sounds so fresh to us. And a lot of film composers write in the style of Vivaldi because there's movement, there's interest. This doesn't sound like Debussy. This doesn't sound like Wagner. This doesn't sound like Eric Satie. These are all people that we know about, of course. This sounds a little bit like Michael Nyman. He's a composer that we've talked about. But it sounds so fresh and so, I hate to say cool, but it's just so cool. So Vivaldi was so innovative, and thank God that he was resurrected in the 20th century, because the Four Seasons is something that's just, all of his music is just lovely and wonderful, and just but as we've talked about, melody lives on, right? If you can hum and whistle a Cole Porter tune, a Gershwin tune, a melody from even Wagner, melodies stay with us, and Vivaldi definitely understood that. And when you have this kind of exciting rhythmic motion underneath it, you have a hit song. He was kind of writing hit songs, even though they were just, concertos, concerti for the church or a service, or, but it must have been very exciting to be in that church hearing this for the first time. It's almost like a concert. So how much fun was all that music? He's just terrific, right? I mean, very dramatic music, all the dynamics like I was talking about. And then what I did mention, he was doing chord progressions with melodies over it, which is what we do in pop music. And we're going to talk about chord progressions tomorrow, the history, the evolution of chord progressions. And we're going to notice that they haven't changed that much in hundreds of years. How is that? What has changed? The feel and perhaps the melody. those have changed. Those two things have changed, but we're gonna dive deeper into it. But I wanted to review Vivaldi, as it's such an iconic, important composer. Wrote so many great pieces. Did he write one piece 500 times or 500 pieces one time, right? That's the big thing. But so very important composer. Thanks for watching this, this class on one of my favorites. I mean, Four Seasons is one of the most famous songs, and it seems like it's just a classic that everybody loves that piece. So have a great rest of the day. Get your film scoring results into me by today for Once Upon a Time in America, because we're going to see that on Thursday. And then tomorrow we're going to dive right into our advanced class. Okay, thanks a lot. Bye.